Welcome back. Congress did something rare these days in passing a bipartisan budget bill last week. However, to reach that compromise, they increased spending by a lot. Deficit hawks are livid. In a Fox Business exclusive, I spoke with House Speaker Paul Ryan about the budget. He says he had to swallow the extra spending to take care of the military.
This was a discretionary budget about getting the military their budget. As you know, the military has been deteriorating, hollowed out. So we are really focused on getting the military their budget because they need a budget that they can plan for. We've hollowed out the force structure for the last 8 years. The discretionary budget that we have now is still lower than the budget that we had put in place in 2011 that we passed. So if you remember, you go back to the BCA, actually was budget chair then, the discretionary spending we have today is lower than the levels we were envisioning back in 2011. And the other point I would simply make is the sequester, no one intended the sequester to kick in, let alone do what it did to the military. So we want to rebuild our military, and we did a few things since those days. We've put in about $250 billion of permanent mandatory spending cuts in that course of time. In this bill, we have Medicare means testing we've added to it. We got rid of the Independent Payment Advisory Board, a big down payment on health care reform. So we've actually done some things in this bill that we think are pretty important. But, yeah, we did have more domestic spending. And the domestic spending we put in here is pretty much one-time spending, disaster aid, infrastructure aid, in exchange for getting the military budget we wanted.
Yeah, but were there...
Here's the question. We got to get on entitlements.
Yeah.
And so this was a discretionary spending budget. This wasn't a full macro budget. This was discretionary spending. And for us, save the military, one-time spending for hurricanes, disaster, get some spending cuts that will grow in the out years. But we do have to go back and focus on entitlement spending. The House Republicans passed the biggest entitlement reform package ever when we passed our health care bill. Unfortunately, somebody did this instead of that in the Senate, and it didn't pass. Yeah. We passed a budget before that cut $7.4 trillion in spending over 10 years in the House. The problem is we have to get our other partners in government to be willing to do the kind of entitlement reform that we're willing to do in the House.
Which is why people are surprised at you, because you've been this entitlement reform person and a deficit hawk for years. And you mentioned running the budget, but you don't look like you are based on this budget.
I know, because this isn't a full budget. This is discretionary spending.
Well, you mentioned discretionary. I mean, you're also a big boost to abstinence education, $7 billion in community health centers, child care grants. So it's more than just the disaster relief and infrastructure.
That's true. So this is a bipartisan budget.
Did you have to agree to that stuff just to get the military money?
Yeah, we had to. You have to give to get. So we had to do some domestic spending that the Democrats wanted so we could get our defense spending. We got a lot of the spending cuts we wanted that they didn't want either. So, yes, this was a bipartisan compromise. You don't get everything you want.
You passed the tax legislation, and now we're seeing economic growth. With economic growth has come inflation, has come higher wages, is coming perhaps higher interest rates. And now it's in your face in terms of how much you're going to be spending on the debt. So $50 billion additional a year just on the interest payments.
No two ways about it. We had to go after mandatory. I would say core inflation, I think PCE is like 1.52 right now. So I don't think we have inflation getting out of the gates.
But interest rates are moving higher, and the markets are trading wildly as a result.
Interest rates should be normalizing, by the way. And the way we look at this is the Fed has been carrying all of the water. We've been doing the Fed with loose, easy money for many years since the recession because we had horrible fiscal policy, overregulation, higher taxes. What are we doing now? We're getting regulatory relief. We're getting tax reform, long time in coming. And so now the fiscal policy authorities are actually taking over the work of getting growth in the economy so that the monetary policy authorities don't have to do that. So we can start normalizing interest rates. We want to have rates being normalized. And I think we're going through that transition right now. But at the end of the day, I'm the same old guy. We're doing the same old thing in the House, which is we've got to have entitlement reform. And that is why we keep pushing for our health care reform. That's why we keep pushing for entitlement reform.
Do you think you will have an actual entitlement reform package in place this year?
I can't answer the question.
It's unlikely
because we would have one last year.
But this is an election year.
Yeah, but I think there are things we can do. If we can get at the root cause of health inflation, if we can do things that are good for health care reform, that bring down the cost of health care, that helps the federal budget. I mean, the challenge is we got about a 90% increase in the retirement population in this country and only a 19% increase in the working population. So we have a demographic challenge.
Yes.
Combine that with the fact that health care costs rise faster than inflation, than ordinary inflation, these programs. So we have to fix health care if we're going to get away from this debt crisis. Does that mean sacrifice your military in the meantime? No. It means build your military, grow your economy. Look, the reason I was coming on here is to talk about how well tax reform is working, the bonuses that are occurring, the faster economic growth, the capital expenditures. So we're going to see higher living standards, faster economic growth because of tax reform. But over the long-term horizon, we've got to get this debt under control. And the only way to do that is entitlement reform. That's why we're never going to give up on entitlement reform.
Well, we hope not, because this is the crux of the problem. We realize that's where the growth in spending is. But
and you're talking to the Speaker of the House, where the House has already passed these bills. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, and I'm trying to make the point that we're shocked at you. People are saying this is the deficit hawk. This is the guy we've been counting on to actually come up with some plans and solutions for these companies, these
and the House has passed these bills. The House has passed these bills, but John McCain said no instead of yes, and we couldn't get that bill passed in the Senate.
Yes, I know. He gave the thumbs down.